Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. Thank you for joining us on the program. Our guest, Dwight Ritter, was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, attended the John Herron Art Institute, graduated from Indiana University. He spent his entire career as a writer, graphic designer, and lyricist. Ritter wrote, produced, and directed the PBS documentary Being Amish, and is the author and illustrator of the novella Emerson The Magnificent. In addition to 12 other books, numerous magazine articles, and K-9 education curricula. Right now, Dwight lives in Cape Cod with his wife, artist Jo Ann Ritter, where he serves on the board of directors of Cape Cod's Writers Center. His first novel, Growin Up White, and that's what we'll be talking about on today's program. Dwight Ritter is with us. Hi, Dwight. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Rick. Welcome. Welcome to you in Cape Cod.
Well, yes, I would love to be in Cape Cod, especially this time of year. That's a great place to get away and to sort of collect your thoughts. And you've been there for a number of years. Artistically, what has that meant for you, being in an environment like that?
Well, it's an absolute necessity. I mean, I've been a creative person all my life, and I just I don't belong in a big city. I was in Boston for a long period of time. And it was very uncomfortable. So Cape Cod is great. It's filled with other writers and artists, and there's a wonderful symphony orchestra here, and there's all different kinds of music. And as soon as all the tourists leave, it's really great.
Get everybody out of town, and then you can settle in with the locals and resume your lifestyle. The book I mentioned is the first novel. It is an excellent read. We're talking about life in the early 1950s in Indianapolis, which could be many, many cities during that time frame. It's a novel, but this was really inspired by your real-life experiences. Talk about what your life was like then and how we see it reflected in the book Growin Up White.
Well, it's the story of a white boy growing up in a black neighborhood, basically. And I was a white boy who was growing up in a black neighborhood. And a lot of the characters in the book were real, not their names and not their total personalities, because I had to change people around in order to make it an interesting story. My life per se was not as exciting as the book. It was only exciting when I would mention to somebody that I was raised in a black neighborhood, and they would all just be aghast because there's not a lot of people that were. And I had an awful lot, still do have an awful lot of close friends who were raised in that neighborhood. And if you look at the cover of my book, Rick, my picture's on the front cover. And which is kind of interesting. It's the little, well, somebody said which one at one point.
I can pick you out. I can pick you out there. And that little grin on your face, you were a handful, I bet, as a child.
That's right.
Georgie had her hands full. And let's talk about Georgie, the character that this crippled black woman that came into your life. And I say sort of a housekeeper because she became sort of a member of the family.
Yes, she did. She was actually a member of the family before she came because she raised my dad, and she really did. There really was a woman named Georgie. Her name was Georgie, and that's the name I used. I wrote a children's book about Georgie in the early 1970s. Never could find a publisher for it. I think it was probably not politically correct back then. But she was a real person. She was the most influential person in my life and my brother's lives, and in retrospect, my dad's also. She ran the family, and she told everybody where they had to be. And when my parents would have a snazzy cocktail party and all the white people would show up, Georgie would show up also, and she'd sit in a chair, and every once in a while she'd ask my dad, whose name was Bussy, she'd say, "Bussy, why don't you go get me a Coke?" And she was just wonderful woman.
It's the story that you'll read in the novel Growin Up White. Dwight Ritter is our guest on This Week in America. The book is available all across the country. Information, and you can log on directly to Dwight's website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Dwight's website is thedwightritter.com, DWIGHT, and the Ritter is RITTER.com. Let's talk a little bit about that. Well, she raised you, and a lot of the time you spent in her community. You spent in the black community. Talk about that's reflected in the book, and sometimes as I'm reading that, I'm seeing you in there, and I understand most of the time it is, but it is a novel. What was it like growing? Did you understand? Did you understand at the time that you were growing up in a different environment?
No, I didn't. And I didn't understand racism back then because I was just there. So as
Yes.
far as we were concerned, I wasn't in a different environment. But it was something that I had to do because my mom was a concert pianist and she traveled all over the world. And my dad was a 7-day-a-week doctor who did house calls. So in order to stay out of trouble, they told my brothers and me that we had to be in Georgie's neighborhood.
It's interesting in the book when you meet Georgie for the first time, you're a little overwhelmed, you're somewhat skeptical as you're meeting her for the first time, and she's basically saying, I'm going to take care of you like you're one of mine. And that obviously was the relationship. That's how she raised you, wasn't it?
Absolutely. We were three of her boys, and she was going to raise us her way. She was much more religious than my mom and dad. And so we got a real full dose of that, and I did a lot of writing about that in the book. There's some very funny things that she felt, and but it's just so heartwarming, and it's a story of friendship, and so many people are trying to turn it into a racial thing, and it's just because it's written by a white guy who was raised in a black neighborhood, but it's a story of friendship and love.
And she really wasted no time in establishing, okay, I may be an out of family member coming in here, but I'm going to raise you and I'm going to have some discipline. And in the book, one of the brothers would steal some fireworks and then he lies about stealing it. And Georgie doesn't hesitate on going to a tree, getting a switch, and she's going to punish him. She's in charge.
Yeah, she and that's a true story that I wrote in the book, and she did. She went out and got a switch, and then she kept it right in the kitchen to remind us that it was always there if we were going to lie or do something else.
Dwight Ritter, our guest on This Week in America. The book is called Growin Up White. It's available all across the country. It is an excellent read. You can log on directly to Dwight's website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. I'm going to sort of advance ahead in the story, then we'll come back and fill in some of the spaces here. But she was a very important part of your family in growing up. You're, 35 years old. You're living in Boston. Your wife is familiar with who Georgie is. Your children are. She dies, and you had a real difficult time, didn't you, dealing with that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'm ashamed of in my life, and one of them was I could not bring myself to go to her funeral. And I mean, it was like your mom dying, and you decided you were going to hunker down and pull a blanket over your head, and that's exactly what I did. It was one of the most horrendous things I've ever gone through. And now every time I go to Indianapolis, I go out and sit on her grave and apologize over and over again.
You know, it's interesting because slowly you came out of that shell and you were remembering her in poems. You wrote a song for Sesame Street. Talk about that process, because it didn't just happen overnight. There was this evolution you went through to deal with this.
Yeah. I spent an awful lot of time doing K through 6 educational curricula and getting involved in every single one I did. Somehow it ended up with a white guy and a black guy, kids. And they just kept popping up. And I did this big program called Scotty and the Musical Kingdom, and it was published by Harper and Row. And I wrote a song in there called Friends. And it was sung by Scotty, who was white, and William, who was black. And Sesame Street picked it up, and they used it on their show a lot. It was the book has been festering in me since I was in college. And it took me 7 years to come up with it. In the meantime, I wrote 2 other books, and then I put it down because I couldn't feel what was happening in the book. And all at once, about 4 years ago, it just all began to become crystal clear how the plot would happen and how I could do all those things. So,
Well, it's interesting, yeah, how that happened. Dwight Ritter, our guest on the program, the book is called Growin Up White, available all across the country. Information available at his website, thedwightritter.com. And of course, you can link on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Georgie left you a cane and a Gideon Bible. The cane you put away, and your wife actually needed that. She was having some hip problems and said, I'd like to use Georgie's cane. And then what suddenly, like this was meant to be, both of you sort of look at each other and go, next book.
that's right. That was such a blow. And I still have the cane. It's right in the other room. I carry it around with me a lot. It's just such a meaningful thing. And the funny thing was the Gideon Bible. And my brother got the Gideon Bible and the cane, and he mailed it to me. And you get Gideon Bibles by stealing them from motel rooms.
Yes.
I don't know if you know that.
Yep, I've seen many in my life. Never taken one, but seen many in my life.
So to get a Gideon Bible from Georgie, who is this absolutely devout Christian and wouldn't steal anything. So I don't know. I think maybe Sam, her son, got it for her. But it was just so wonderful, and it has her name in it, and she underlines everything, so it's just filled with underlines.
You know, it's interesting as you look back in the early 50s and what you went through in Indianapolis, and you were living basically the white life. You were living in the black community with Georgie when you would go there. Yet Indianapolis really wasn't ready for that at the time, were they?
No, it wasn't. Indianapolis, historically, back in the 20s, was the home of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
And so that feeling in the town was always there. And I would suspect, and I don't know, but I would suspect that it was more racist than most other Midwestern towns or even many Southern towns. It was very much hidden. And we all knew about it, but we sort of accepted it back then. The outrage didn't really happen until Ferguson. And it's just interesting how you accept a lifestyle and you go on and you make the best of it. And that's what they did. And I was part of that.
What was it like and how did they treat people in the white community who had friends, associations in the black community?
Well, they certainly, when they found out, they were not happy at all. And they called me all sorts of names. And it's not politically correct to tell you what those names are. But I was really, I began to be ostracized. But I also found back in those days, there was also a large element of people who were very sympathetic to the black cause back then. And my parents, my dad was a screaming liberal, and 90% of his patients were black. And so he was just thrilled, when we were at Georgie's. And I think he became what he became because of Georgie. She raised him. But it's interesting how the white people began to cut me off. And even when I went to Indiana University down in Bloomington, and I took a wonderful black girl to a dance on campus, and that was not a popular thing that I did. And I remember telling Georgie about it, and she told me I should never do that. She said, "You should know better." And but at that point, I was beginning to toot the horn.
The book is called Growin Up White. Dwight Ritter is the author, our guest on the program. In the book, and it follows Rick, who's one of 3 young boys in the family. And Rick says that at one point, I was an empty glass with no more water to spill. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, that's right. I don't remember that. That's a good line.
It really is.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. And it got to be very perplexing, especially when I wanted to, in high school, when I wanted to have dates with a black girl. It got to be very Nobody understood, not even Georgie. And in the book, Georgie became just like everybody else when I decided I was going to have a date with one of my friends in the black neighborhood. And Georgie said, "You don't want to do that." Archie said, "Don't do it." And I guess that the rest is in the book.
Well, yeah, and now Andy, who's a brother in the book, I don't know if this actually happened, but it was interesting. We were talking about reactions you could expect from people by befriending people in the black community. And it said, racists thrive on fear. And that's another one that jumped out there because, boy, in a sentence, that really sums up a lot of feelings, doesn't it?
It sure does. That is so, so true. And the more you get involved in it, you read about it, and you listen to people who are really racist talk about it. It's fear, and they're afraid that they're wrong in many places. But it's something that comes out when you talk to people about it.
You mentioned this is a book about friendship, and it really is. There will be times when you smile. There will be times when you tear up as you're reading the book. It's memories filled with love. What do you want people to take away from reading the book? This certainly will get them thinking about a number of issues. What would you like them to take away from the book?
See, that's a wonderful question. I would love to be able to have people read the book and realize that a black culture and a white culture can blend and become one and not hate each other because of a different color, and that the love of human beings is still there. And that would make this old guy feel so good.
You know, it's interesting as I'm reading the book, we're reminded how far we've come. And we sort of pat ourselves in the back, or did a few years ago, that we've elected a African American president, and we've really made great strides. Same time, we realize, especially reading headlines now, how far we have to go. Did you have those feelings as you were writing Growing Up White?
No, I had a story to tell, and there was no racial thing happening for me, and it all happened when Ferguson happened last August, and the book was not quite done. And a bunch of my friends and this publisher came along and said, "Hey, you got to get this book out because this is so timely right now. You've got to get it out." And I couldn't understand why. But the timeliness of it was so very important, and I had no idea when I was writing a love story, and I had no idea everything else happened. And now, as I travel around the country and talk to wonderful people like you, it gives me a chance to say that.
The book is called Growin Up White. Dwight Ritter is our guest on the program. He is the author of the book. The book, as I say, is available at all the major bookstores across the country. Available information at his website, thedwightritter.com. And, of course, you can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on. A couple minutes left in the program, and too many things to talk about to squeeze into one program, and would love to have you come back. But another interesting aspect of your life happened a few years ago. As you're doing Spanish translation, you're working with Operation Walk, and you're in a number of countries, including Cuba. Talk about your thoughts on maybe we're beginning to, we are loosening up relationships. I'm not sure how far, but talk about the Cuban people and your thoughts on what's happening there.
Well, I think this should have happened a long time ago. And I spent a lot of time in Miami, and I have a lot of friends in the Spanish-speaking community. And there is a nationalistic pride in Cuba by a lot of Floridians who were pushed out of their houses and everything, and yes. So they're very, very angry. But this is something that has to happen, and I'm so proud of Obama that he is making this thing happen, because it's going to open up an awful lot. It's a wonderful area, and the people down there are just delightful. It's like going back to the 50s. I mean, all the cars are
yes.
Cars from the 50s, and there is a certain naivete that's there, that you think, oh boy, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could go back there? And there's no racism in Cuba.
It's interesting. Is it a generational divide that you see? As you mentioned, the older people, some who fled from there, where the government took their possessions, they had to leave the country, they lost all of their rights. Where you hear some of the younger, the children talking, and they're like, it hasn't worked. The embargo, it has not worked. It's time that we change how we approach this.
You're right. It didn't. It really didn't work. It became a money thing, and when something becomes a money thing, it's bound not to work. It's going to burn itself out, and so the hearts of the people are what need to change, and that's the same thing that's happening in the black community in the United States. The hearts of the white people and the black people need to change. And the same thing applies to what's going on in Cuba today. I spend a lot of time in Nicaragua and Guatemala, and the people down there are just wonderful. And here I walk around with blonde hair and blue eyes, but I speak Spanish. It's kind of weird.
We are unfortunately out of time. We'd love to have Dwight back. So much more that we can talk about. The book is an excellent book. It's called Growin Up White, a novel written by Dwight Ritter. His website is The Dwight Ritter, and that's RITTER.com. Books available at major bookstores all across the country. You can also link on directly to Dwight's website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Dwight, a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rick. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you. It was great having you with us, and look forward to having you back on the program. Once again, the book, Growin Up White. Information available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us.